Good afternoon. Today I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Donald Smith's onion model of culture. I heard a joke yesterday. Actually, I read a joke. It was in an email from a guy who was trying to sell me marketing stuff. But it went like this. Old fish swam up to two younger fish and said, "Hey guys, how's the water today?" And the young fish said, "What's water?" Right? Hilarious. That's one of the old culture jokes. Culture is the water the fish swims in. You'll find the more you explore conversations about culture, the more bad jokes you're going to run into. Because the best people can do when describing culture, is often a metaphor or an analogy that works really well for part of the task of describing culture, but is really poor in other ways. Like, for example, that's an excellent metaphor. Culture is the water the fish swims in. The fish is unconscious of it. The fish moves through it all the time. The fish is designed to move through it, but the fish doesn't know. The fish is breathing it in, breathing it out, but he's utterly unaware of the matrix, the context, the juice that he's living inside of. But it determines the shape of his life. At the same time, it's not a great metaphor because culture isn't just there. It's not just what we're moving through and moving in. Culture also is shaping us. So the water doesn't shape the fish. The water determines the fact that it has to be a fish and not like a polar bear for long, although a polar bear can swim. Maybe not like a horse. It's got to be a fish. But at the same time, it doesn't make the fish the fish. There's a very real sense in which your culture makes you who you are to a very real degree. Very little of who you are is in the seed of you. A lot of it is shaped by the context you grew up in. So each of these metaphors, culture is the air that you breathe, and then the definitions are so verbose and they're unwieldy and heavy and difficult to care about once you're done reading it. And everybody has different main nouns that they want to pitch in, like artifact and what's an artifact. But artifact gets pitched into some definitions of culture, and sometimes they blend it with language and they talk about lingua culture, and it gets overwhelming. Especially it gets overwhelming for people who aren't interested in just studying culture for its own sake, but they want to understand how to navigate culture. They want to understand how to become part of a community and understand that community well. They're seeking to understand the people, not just the ideas that the people espouse, but the people themselves. They want to know their heart. This particular model of culture by Dr. Donald Smith, I think, is just exquisite for the purpose of helping you bore deep into culture. So let me tell you how he introduces this. He does a great job with this. He's this very well-spoken man. Never seen him not in a suit. Might have seen him in a polo shirt once, but he worked all over Africa. He's an anthropologist. He's a really cool guy. Like him a lot. But when he was training us, we came into the onion model of culture talk, and he had put on all of our desks a cutting board and an onion and a sharp knife. Put us in pairs. And he said this: "Where do onions come from?" I'll just give you the talk. Where do onions come from? Somebody raised their hand and says onion seeds, and of course that's wrong because onions are a bulb. And I didn't know this, but in the third world, in many developing countries, especially very poor countries, people don't eat the entire onion. They eat everything down to the core, and they leave the core intact. And they leave it intact from this part, the green bunchy part, the black green bunchy part, and then to the pointy part. They leave the core intact, and they put that back in the ground and it grows another onion. And he says in the same way, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to get the core. I want you to reduce the onion that I put in front of you down to its core. And then we're going to talk about that. So we all start cutting and whittling, and some of us just carefully peel the papery layers off and start to peel away the onion. Some are like, shaka, waka, and just start hacking at it into blocks and cubes, trying to Michelangelo their way down to this little core. And everyone starts to cry because it makes you cry when you cut onions, and everyone's uncomfortable and making this gross noise and taking turns cutting it, and they're supposed to make observations about the experience as they go in the observation journal. So we're making our observations, then he asks us, tell me about your experience of finding the core. Did anyone find the core? And people raise their hand, and he's like, that's not a core, You damaged the core, it will never grow. You found a core, good job. That's a double core. Those are really hard to get. Sometimes the onion has like 2 little cores on the inside. Tell me about the experience, he said. And people were like, well, I mean, we cried a lot. And it was very uncomfortable. And we got very impatient. And we really wanted to go faster. And sometimes we got in little minor arguments with each other about how we were supposed to be doing it. And he said every one of those sentences will be very true when you move into another culture and attempt to penetrate this culture to understand it. You will cry a lot. You will misunderstand so much, and you will be misunderstood so frequently. You'll become so frustrated. It will take so much longer than you anticipate. And you will cry. It'll be uncomfortable. You won't like the smell. You'll wish you had a sharper knife. You wish you had better tools. You wish that idiot next to you would shut up so you could do it the way you know you're supposed to. And then you'll be really humbled by the fact that maybe he was right, you know. The act of crossing a culture is difficult. The act of just observing the culture isn't so hard. And the act of being morally superior and telling the culture how it's supposed to be, that's also pretty easy. Any punk can do that. But the act of actually humbly entering a culture and becoming a participant in it so that you can understand, that's no easy thing, and it can be painful. But if you are patient and skilled, you can do it. So he says culture is shaped like an onion, and understanding it this way helps us to enter it and to go ever deeper into the culture until we're able to understand the heart of the culture, what makes that culture tick. All the outer layers of an onion their shape is determined by the shape of the core. Onions don't grow from the outside in, they grow from that core out. So the contours of the core determine the contours of every layer after that. But we never perceive from the core out, we always perceive from the outside in. So these are the 4 layers of the onion. And in upcoming videos, we're going to take just little short conversations to help you understand what each layer is. But let me talk you through them now. The outer layers are the behaviors. These are the things people do. And it's all the things people do. All the things people intentionally and unintentionally do in order to communicate or in order to engage one another or interact. These behaviors are the ways that a culture asserts itself. A culture makes itself visible and understood, and people are able to understand where they are, where they fit in the culture on the basis of these signals. We'll talk about that in a minute. Underneath that, shaping those behaviors, driving those behaviors, is this layer called social authority. Both words are important. Authority is important because these are things that tell you what to do. They tell the people in the culture what to do. And the people in the culture recognize these authorities as having the right to tell them what to do, or it's appropriate for them to do what these authorities want. Okay? But it's social authority. It's not just formal authority. There are informal and formal authorities. It has more to do with being that's not what I want. Allowing yourself, consciously or unconsciously, to be shepherded into a certain set of behaviors by the force of other people's, especially your in-group's expectations, whether or not you're conscious of that. Underneath that, though, is experience. Both your experience, but also our experience, the culture's group experience. What a people have been through, the things that a culture has experienced together, shape what they think is important and who they will submit to, the social authorities, which then drive the behaviors. But how that culture goes through the things it goes through and how that culture interprets what it goes through is in the core. The core comprises things that essentially amount to assumptions. They're the software the thinking is done with. These things are the tracks, the thoughts, and the reactions move on. So they're the thinking that no one's doing. It's the thinking that happens before people start to think. It's their taking off point. And we'll talk about that too. So in the next several videos, I'm hoping to unpack for you the signal systems that comprise these behaviors, describe for you what social authorities are and how they work, and give you some examples of those. And then unpack for you what kinds of experiences, both collective and individual, how that shapes what everything else that happens, and why that all comes from the core. The way we're going to do this, though, is I'm gonna turn around. I'm going to jump straight to social authorities, then experiences, and then core, because there's going to be another set of videos describing these behaviors. These behaviors are 12 signal systems organized on the basis of consciousness of use. So there are, again, 12 of them, but the one you're most conscious of is verbal speech. These are the things that when you are communicating, you're very aware of what you are saying, unless you've been caught talking to yourself, right? Or talking in your sleep. These are the things that you're conscious of. You're consciously receiving them. You're consciously sending them. The least conscious is olfactory, the sense of taste and smell. And things are communicated with that particular signal system. Very important content is often communicated with that particular signal system, and we'll talk about that. That's the least consciously used, but it's the most believed. And the verbal language is the most consciously used and least believed. And in the middle, you have all kinds of things like body language, kinesics, pictorial communication, the way we use pictures and symbols to communicate things, numbers, written language, the use of light and darkness, the use of color, the use of space, the use of touch, time, how time is inhabited. All of these things, and a few others, comprise, Don Smith contends, comprise everything that human beings can do to communicate. Essentially, everything that's observable that human beings can do to communicate. These signal systems, not everything's a signal system either. So a signal system has to be intentional. You have to be intending to send some information through it. It has to be deliberate. Signal system has to be understood by members of that culture to have meaning and to be a system with which we say something. A signal, so you can't just, an arbitrary action by a person hiccuping is not a signal system because it's not deliberate, it's not understood as a way of communicating. Whistling to yourself is not understood as a way of communicating, except in some cultures where people whistle, so as a word. So the deliberateness, the content, whether or not you intend to convey content with it, whether or not the culture understands it as a signal system, and whether or not it has a grammar, like a syntax and a vocabulary. Some colors mean something and other colors don't. Some numbers mean something, other numbers don't. The numbers that mean something, one number means one thing, another number means another thing, but it means something, and using them at different times and in different ways, syntax, is a way of communicating something. And a lot can be communicated without using any words, and because those signals are lower on the totem pole of consciousness than your spoken speech, they're more believed. This is where we start to get into a conversation about high context and low context cultures where more is conveyed not with words and more versus cultures where more is conveyed with words, and how often these cultures feel like people from the other cultures are lying to them. That's also a fun thing to watch. But I'm going to unpack these layers, and then we're going to go back and do a series of videos on the signal systems. It won't matter what order you watch them in. I'm going to try to do them where they're each self-contained. But my hope is that once you get a grip on all 4 layers, you'll be in a position to be able to once you've identified a culture that you want to understand, be able to make intelligent observations about their behaviors, be able to explore the authorities that have shaped them, be able also to explore their story as they understand it, as they tell it, as they've experienced it, and maybe even get a glimpse of what's going on in the core. When you do that, you might become the kind of person that they can experience, as a testimony, as a witness, as a demonstration of the love of Jesus. And if they experience you there, Jesus may be able to challenge the assumptions in their core that make it hard for them to receive him as king. That is my hope for you, always to make you more free and more dangerous. So may the grace and peace of Jesus be with you, and may you enjoy some onions.